In the brutal winter of 1899, Kansas faced record-breaking cold, with temperatures plummeting to 40 degrees Celsius and snow burying entire homesteads. But in the small town of Hayes, something far more chilling was unfolding behind the doors of the Parker Brothers warehouse. As spring arrived and the snow melted, investigators uncovered alarming discrepancies in county death records. Over 300 families were believed to have died that winter, but only 47 bodies were found in the cemetery. The rest had vanished, and the Parker Brothers' furnaces weren't just burning wood and coal. They were burning evidence of the most systematic crime spree in Kansas history. Their charitable image hid a dark reality as they orchestrated a series of calculated crimes under the guise of helping the community. The truth buried for over a century was revealed in documents discovered in a water-damaged basement. These papers would change how we understand survival desperation and the darker side of human nature. Hayes, Kansas began the year with promise. This railroad town home to about 8,000 residents had weathered harsh winters before. The town, located along the Kansas Pacific Railway, was a hub for settlers and offered prosperity. Main Street bustled with stores, churches, and businesses, but beyond it lay vast, isolated prairie, where homesteaders struggled for survival. Thomas and Samuel Parker arrived in 1894, using their capital to buy a large warehouse on the town's outskirts. They presented themselves as entrepreneurs, offering cleaning and estate services for families in crisis. When homesteaders died, the brothers handled the aftermath, removing bodies, selling personal belongings, and preparing homes for new occupants. In a time of frequent death, their services were indispensable. As winter descended in 1899, few could predict the devastating cold that would strike. The first snow arrived in early November, and by December, temperatures were colder than ever. The railroad lines became unreliable, and isolated homesteads were cut off from the outside world. The Parker brothers, however, were prepared. Their warehouse was stocked with supplies, and they had the only reliable winter transportation in the area. But what seemed like helpful preparation was actually the beginning of a sinister plan. As families began seeking shelter and assistance, the brothers showed apparent kindness, but their true intentions became clear as they began asking unusual questions about property ownership and inheritance. They also visited isolated homesteads under the guise of offering help, but it was part of a much darker scheme to exploit human tragedy for profit. The Parker brothers arrived with supplies, warm clothing, and kind words. But these visits often preceded mysterious disappearances. On December 14th, the Kowalski family, living 12 miles north of Hayes, was visited by the brothers. 3 days later, their homestead was found abandoned, with no trace of where the family had gone. The brothers claimed they had helped the Kowalskis relocate to Missouri, but no such relatives were ever found. As the temperature plummeted to 38 degrees by Christmas, the town's population began to shrink as families fled or vanished. The Parker brothers seemed to thrive in the chaos, their furnace burning non-stop, sending a sickly, sweet odor into the air. Dr. Edmund Hartwell, the town's physician, attempted to investigate the source of the smell, but the brothers always turned him away, claiming they were burning contaminated materials from diseased homes. Hartwell, though suspicious, accepted this explanation, despite noting the strange odor in his journal. By New Year's Day 1900, Hayes's population had dwindled from 8,000 to fewer than 2,000. The Parker brothers claimed most families had either perished from the cold or fled, and they were now processing abandoned properties. But a few observant residents, including Janet Thornfield, a local widow, began to notice troubling patterns. Janet kept detailed notes of the families who had supposedly died or fled, and her records, discovered in 1962, revealed a disturbing pattern of deception. The brothers reported the deaths of 43 families during December and January. Yet many of these families had been in good health and well prepared when Janet had last seen them. For example, the Brennan family had visited Janet's boarding house just days before their reported deaths, and the brothers claimed they had frozen to death in their home. When Janet inquired about the funeral, she was told the bodies were too badly damaged by the cold for a proper viewing. Janet grew more suspicious when she witnessed something chilling on the evening of January 15th. As she walked past the Parker brothers' warehouse, she saw a man, woman, and 2 children inside near the furnace. The family seemed distressed, and she heard the woman crying. When she checked again after an hour, the family had disappeared, and the brothers were feeding materials into the furnace. The next morning, Janet learned the family had been reported as frozen to death just days earlier. The brothers explained that Janet must have been mistaken, but she knew what she had seen. Janet's growing concern led her to monitor the brothers more closely. What she uncovered was a disturbing methodical pattern. The brothers had perfected a system for exploiting the desperation of the winter and the trust of their community. They would target vulnerable families, offer assistance under the guise of charity, and then after gaining their trust, dispose of them and their properties. The brothers' operation was efficient, and they used their knowledge of the community to identify and eliminate those who stood in their way. Once the Parker brothers gained a family's trust, they subtly increased their dependence on their services by providing heating fuel, food, and transportation. But behind this generosity was a deliberate plan to make the families more vulnerable and isolated. They were experts in property law and inheritance procedures, enabling them to forge documents and manipulate official records. Their connections with key county officials gave them a head start on property transfers, and they perfected methods to eliminate any evidence of their crimes. When they decided to dispose of a family, they would lure them to their warehouse, often under the pretense of needing help with estate matters or offering to connect them with distant relatives. Once inside, the family would be overpowered and killed. The brothers had designed their furnace to burn at high temperatures, completely destroying both bodies and any personal belongings that could link them to the crime. Their legitimate business gave them cover, as the presence of personal effects in their warehouse was normal for their estate clearing services. The constant furnace operation was explained away as necessary for disposing of contaminated items. Even the peculiar smell emanating from the warehouse was attributed to burning organic materials from abandoned homes. Dr. Edmund Hartwell, the town physician, noted that he was never called to examine any of the bodies the brothers claimed to have found. Each time he was told that the bodies had been too badly damaged by the cold or disease to warrant an examination, a highly unusual circumstance for someone in his position. The brothers also developed an efficient system for liquidating stolen property. They would sort through the belongings of the deceased, keeping valuables for themselves and burning anything that could be traced back to the victims. They maintained detailed inventories, which they would later claim were legitimate purchases or salvaged items. Disturbingly, the brothers seemed to have convinced themselves they were doing a public service. In letters discovered later, Thomas Parker justified their actions as mercy work to relieve families from the suffering of harsh winter conditions, while Samuel Parker's diary entries suggest he genuinely believed they were sparing families from slow deaths by starvation and freezing. By mid-January 1900, with temperatures never rising above 20 degrees for over 3 weeks, the brothers operated with impunity. Hayes was isolated, and communication with the outside world was cut off. During this time, they claimed to have processed the estates of over 60 families, a number so statistically improbable that it should have raised suspicions. However, the extreme conditions made oversight nearly impossible. The county courthouse was often inaccessible due to snow, and the railroad was suspended. The brothers' methodical approach to selecting targets, focusing on families with valuable property, allowed them to maximize their profits. They even forged property transfer documents to expedite transactions that would have normally taken weeks. By this point, the brothers had recruited several desperate townsfolk to assist them. These accomplices, likely unaware of the full scope of the brothers' activities, later provided testimony that revealed the full extent of the operation. They described a warehouse filled with personal belongings, furniture, and household goods from dozens of families. They witnessed the brothers sorting through the possessions with the efficiency of merchants. One accomplice, Frank Collar, recalled carrying items from the warehouse to the furnace, noting that many of them appeared to be in excellent condition, raising questions about the true nature of the operation. Frank also revealed that there were rooms the workers were forbidden to enter and periods when they were told to leave the premises entirely, which were likely the times when bodies were disposed of. The brothers maintained elaborate cover stories to explain their activities, including fictitious letters from supposed relatives of the deceased and fake reports of families fleeing to distant states. Their perfect system was shattered when on February 14, 1900, a young girl named Emma Schultz found a small wooden toy horse partially buried in the snow near the warehouse. The toy, hand-carved with the initials P.E., belonged to Peter Brennan, a 6-year-old boy from a family the brothers had claimed died in December. Mrs. Schultz recognized the toy immediately and knew that Peter had been playing with it just days before the family was reported dead. The discovery of the toy marked the first crack in the brothers' carefully constructed facade. Peter would never have parted with his toy horse voluntarily. Mrs. Schultz, alarmed by the discovery, shared her concerns with Janet Thornfield, who had been quietly tracking suspicious activities involving the Parker brothers. Together, they began investigating, systematically comparing notes on the families that had reportedly died or fled during the harsh winter. What they uncovered was a pattern of discrepancies that couldn't be explained away by coincidence or confusion. The two women realized they needed help, but approaching the local authorities seemed impossible. Sheriff Tom Brennan, overwhelmed by the crisis, had been relying on the Parker brothers' reports about the deaths and disappearances. With the county judge unreachable due to snow and state authorities consumed with other crises, Janet and Mrs. Schultz recruited other concerned residents to help with their investigation. They approached Dr. Hartwell, troubled by his inability to examine the bodies the brothers claimed to have found, and Mary Kellerman, the record keeper, who was uneasy with the brothers' repeated inquiries about property law. This small group of investigators began meeting secretly, piecing together their observations. They found that when combined, their evidence painted a disturbing picture of systematic deception and criminal activity. Dr. Hartwell noted medical inconsistencies in the reported causes of death. Mary Kellerman uncovered irregularities in the property transfers, while Janet Thornfield contributed detailed observations of the brothers' schedules. Mrs. Schultz, with her knowledge of the affected families, helped connect the dots. Together, they developed a timeline that contradicted the brothers' official story, identifying families who had died under unlikely circumstances, rapid property transfers, and a total lack of bodies, funerals, or normal death procedures. The group began to form a chilling theory. The constant furnace operation, the strange odors, the brothers' access to isolated families, and the systematic disappearances all pointed to a horrifying conclusion. With their evidence mounting, the group faced a crucial decision: wait for the outside authorities in spring, or act immediately to prevent more deaths. The decision was made for them when they learned the brothers were planning a visit to the Kowalski family, one of the last isolated homesteads. On February 22, 1900, Dr. Hartwell and Janet decided to follow the brothers. They trailed them at a safe distance, watching as the brothers arrived at the Kowalski homestead, carrying supplies and acting as concerned neighbors. The family, isolated for weeks, welcomed the brothers warmly. After several hours inside, the brothers emerged with the Kowalski family parents and 3 children who appeared to be preparing for travel. The brothers loaded them into a sled and began the journey back to town. Dr. Hartwell and Janet followed, expecting the family to be safely brought to Hayes. But instead, the sled went directly to the warehouse. The family was led inside and the building was secured. Dr. Hartwell and Janet waited hours expecting the family to emerge. But by dawn, there was no sign of them. The furnace continued to burn with an unusual intensity. Convinced they had witnessed the abduction of the Kowalski family, the 2 returned to town, gathered their fellow investigators, and realized they could no longer wait for outside authorities. It was time to act. They decided to confront the Parker brothers directly. Demanding an explanation for the Kowalski family's disappearance, the investigators approached the Parker brothers' warehouse on the morning of February 23, 1900, armed with their documentation and ready for confrontation. Thomas Parker greeted them at the door, his calm demeanor unchanged. When asked about the Kowalski family, he claimed they had suffered from severe frostbite and malnutrition, and that he and Samuel had taken them to relatives in Junction City. He dismissed all their concerns, attributing the evidence to misunderstandings. However, during the confrontation, Dr. Hartwell made a crucial observation: stains on Thomas Parker's clothing that appeared to be blood. Thomas explained the stains as being from butchering livestock, but Dr. Hartwell, trained in medicine, recognized them as human blood. The confrontation escalated when Janet Thornfield demanded to search the warehouse. Thomas refused, citing the presence of sensitive materials and contamination risks. His refusal only deepened the investigators' suspicions. Unable to gain access on their own, the group approached Deputy Marshal Tom Brennan, presenting their evidence and demanding an official investigation. Initially skeptical, Brennan was eventually persuaded by the mounting evidence. On February 25, 1900, Deputy Marshal Brennan, accompanied by Dr. Hartwell and 3 volunteers, forcibly entered the warehouse. What they discovered inside would set off a wave of criminal investigations and become the subject of decades of scrutiny. Inside the warehouse was divided into several sections, each serving a different part of the brothers' operation. The main area contained hundreds of personal items, clothing, furniture, tools, and household goods, meticulously organized and cataloged. In a separate room, the investigators found detailed records, including property maps, family information, financial documents, and estate-related correspondence. These records painted a chilling picture of how the brothers had systematically gathered information on families' resources and vulnerabilities, enabling them to target the most valuable properties. Most disturbing were the personal effects of deceased families. Jewelry, photographs, religious items, and other belongings of families would never have parted with voluntarily. These items were sorted and cataloged, each noted for its estimated value and potential for resale. The furnace area contained the most horrifying evidence. The brothers had modified the furnace to burn at extremely high temperatures, capable of completely incinerating organic materials. Around the furnace, the investigators found bone fragments, burned clothing, and other remains. Dr. Hartwell collected these fragments later, confirming they were human and from multiple individuals of different ages. It was estimated that dozens, possibly over 100 bodies had been disposed of in the furnace during the brutal winter months. The investigators also uncovered the belongings of the Kowalski family in a locked room, including children's toys and the parents' clothing. These items were recently cataloged, suggesting that the family had been processed within the past few days. Most chilling was a journal kept by Samuel Parker, revealing the brothers' methods and twisted justification. Over the years, They had perfected their system, rationalizing their actions through a warped logic of mercy and efficiency. When confronted with the overwhelming evidence, the Parker brothers attempted to maintain their innocence, claiming that they were running a legitimate estate service and any irregularities were due to the extreme winter conditions. However, the physical evidence and the testimonies from witnesses left them with no defense. Their guilt was undeniable. Thomas Parker, the older brother, eventually offered a partial confession in exchange for the assurance that his younger brother would be spared execution. His confession revealed the full extent of their activities and outlined their methods, motivations, and the number of families they had killed. According to Thomas, the brothers had eliminated 47 families during the winter of 1899-1900, resulting in approximately 200 individual victims. Initially, they targeted families already near death due to cold and starvation. But as their system became more refined and profitable, they began actively seeking healthy families with valuable properties. The brothers had developed sophisticated techniques for luring families to their warehouse, often claiming they had found relatives who could help or needed assistance with estate matters. Once inside, the families were overpowered and killed, typically by suffocation or blunt force trauma to avoid blood evidence. The bodies were then disposed of in their modified furnace, capable of completely consuming human remains within hours. Personal belongings were sorted with valuable items, kept for resale, and everything else destroyed. They had created elaborate false documentation to explain the family's disappearances and facilitate the transfer of their properties. Samuel Parker, the younger brother, offered further insight into their psychological state during the winter. He described how they had gradually desensitized themselves to the killings, viewing them as a necessary business function rather than murder. They convinced themselves they were providing a service to the community by preventing slow deaths from starvation and freezing. The brothers' trial became one of Kansas's most notorious criminal proceedings. The evidence was overwhelming: physical remains, documented confessions, and witness testimony, revealing the full scope of their crimes. Both brothers were convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to death. However, the legal proceedings were complicated by questions about jurisdiction, the extreme winter conditions, and the difficulty in proving specific crimes when so much evidence had been destroyed. The trial was extensively covered in newspapers across the Midwest and became a subject of study for criminologists and legal scholars. The discovery of the brothers' crimes sent shockwaves through Kansas and beyond. The systematic nature of their murders, their sophisticated methods, and the sheer number of victims made the case unprecedented in American criminal history. Hayes, the town where the brothers operated, was left grappling with the consequences. The loss of a significant portion of the population and the falsification or destruction of property records created legal chaos, with authorities spending years trying to determine the rightful owners of affected properties. The case also raised difficult questions about community responsibility and the systems that allowed such crimes to go undetected. Many residents, feeling guilty for not recognizing the warning signs, struggled with the aftermath. Dr. Hartwell, who played a pivotal role in exposing the brothers, was profoundly impacted. His medical journal entries show a man deeply shaken by the discovery of such evil within his community. Although he continued practicing medicine in Hayes, he never fully recovered from the trauma of the investigation. Janet Thornfield, who had first suspected the brothers and relentlessly pursued the truth, became a local hero. However, she wrestled with the knowledge that her earlier intervention might have saved lives. She remained vigilant throughout her life, continuing to maintain detailed records of community activities and watching for signs of similar crimes, until her death in 1934. The case had broader implications for law enforcement and community oversight. It demonstrated how extreme conditions could provide cover for criminal activity and highlighted the importance of maintaining official oversight, even in crisis situations. The Parker brothers case became a critical study in policing, and legal schools used as an example of how systematic criminals could exploit community trust in crisis-driven circumstances. Despite the extensive investigation trial proceedings and years of subsequent research, many questions about the Parker brothers' crimes remain unanswered. The true number of victims may never be known, as the brothers' records were incomplete and much evidence was destroyed in their furnace. Some estimates suggest that the number of victims could have been significantly higher than the 47 families mentioned in Thomas Parker's confession. The brothers' backgrounds and the origins of their criminal behavior remain a mystery. Authorities were never able to definitively determine whether they had committed similar crimes before arriving in Hayes, or if their actions were solely a result of the extreme winter of 1899 to 1900. Though some evidence hints at potential involvement in suspicious activities elsewhere, no direct connections were ever established. The fate of certain families also remains uncertain. While the brothers confessed to killing 47 families, additional families disappeared during that winter without any clear explanation. Some of these families may have died from natural causes or fled, but the possibility remains that the brothers' activities were even more widespread than they admitted. Researchers continue to be fascinated by the psychological aspects of the case. The brothers' ability to maintain a facade of respectability while committing systematic murder raises questions about the nature of evil and the psychological factors that can drive ordinary individuals to commit extraordinary crimes. Their use of religious and charitable justifications for their actions reveals the psychological mechanisms criminals use to rationalize their behavior. The case also raises important questions about the nature of community and societal systems. The residents of Hayes trusted the Parker brothers based on their reputation and seemingly respectable demeanor, which highlights how criminals can exploit social trust to facilitate their crimes. The brothers were executed on October 15, 1900, at the Kansas State Penitentiary in Lansing. Their executions brought legal closure to one of the most horrific crime sprees in American history. But the impact of their actions reverberated through Hayes and beyond for decades. The Parker brothers' case remains one of the most extensively documented examples of systematic murder in American criminal history. Surviving records, including court transcripts, witness testimonies, and physical evidence, offer a comprehensive picture of how two individuals exploited extreme circumstances to commit crimes of unprecedented scope and brutality. The story of the Parker brothers serves as a reminder of the potential for evil within seemingly normal communities and the importance of maintaining vigilance even during times of crisis. Their crimes demonstrated how quickly social bonds can break down under pressure, and how criminals can exploit community trust to carry out their activities. Today, the site of the Parker brothers' warehouse in Hayes, Kansas, is marked by a simple memorial to the victims of their crimes. The memorial stands as a reminder of the need for community vigilance and protection of vulnerable members of society, even in the harshest conditions. The case continues to be studied by criminologists, historians, and legal scholars as an example of how extreme circumstances can provide cover for criminal activity and how communities can work together to expose and stop such crimes. The investigation that led to the brothers' capture highlights the importance of citizen involvement in law enforcement and the power of community action in the face of evil. This story reminds us that even in the darkest moments of human history, there are individuals willing to stand up for justice and protect their communities. The courage of Janet Thornfield, Dr. Hartwell, and the other investigators who exposed the brothers' crimes serves as an inspiration for anyone facing difficult moral choices in their own lives. Even after the brothers' execution, disturbing discoveries continued to surface throughout Hayes and surrounding areas. in March 1901, nearly a year after the trial, concluded construction workers renovating the basement of the old Methodist church found a hidden collection of personal items beneath the floorboards. The cache included jewelry, family photographs, children's toys, and religious artifacts, items that matched descriptions of belongings from families the Parker brothers had claimed to process. The most chilling discovery was a leather-bound ledger seemingly containing detailed records of the brothers' activities dating back to 1897, 2 years before the infamous winter. The ledger entries, written in a coded system, took investigators months to decipher. But once translated, they revealed that the brothers had been systematically eliminating isolated families far longer than anyone had suspected. According to the entries, the brothers had killed at least 15 families during the winters of 1897 and 1898, perfecting their methods before the killing spree of 1899. The ledger described their techniques with chilling detail, including how they learned to dispose of bodies, completely forge property documents, and manipulate community perceptions. The entries also provided disturbing psychological insights into the brothers' mindset. Thomas Parker wrote extensive justifications for their actions, describing their victims as burdens on society, and claiming they were performing natural selection by eliminating the weak and vulnerable. Samuel Parker's entries were more focused on the logistics of their operations and the financial gains from their crimes. The most horrifying parts of the ledger detailed the brothers' experiments with different methods of killing. They had initially used poison obtained from agricultural supplies, but eventually settled on suffocation and blunt force trauma as their preferred techniques. The discovery of the ledger forced authorities to reopen their investigation, revealing that the brothers had been killing families for at least 3 years. The total number of victims could have been well over 300, making their case one of the most extensive serial killing sprees in American history. As news of this additional evidence spread, new testimonies came to light, offering further insight into the brothers' activities. Margaret Kowalski, the sole survivor of the family, Hartwell and Janet Thornfield, had seen being taken to the warehouse, provided one of the most detailed accounts of the brothers' methods. Margaret had been visiting relatives in Junction City when her family was eliminated, and upon her return in the spring of 1900, she found that her entire family had supposedly died of exposure. Her testimony revealed that the brothers had been planning her family's elimination for months, waiting for the opportunity when she would be away. They had visited her family repeatedly in the autumn of 1899, offering help with winter preparations and gradually gaining their trust. They provided her family with contaminated heating fuel which burned inefficiently, forcing them to depend on the brothers for more supplies. The brothers also spread rumors that the Kowalski family was suffering from a contagious disease, isolating them from potential help. Margaret's testimony also revealed that the brothers had been systematically poisoning isolated families with small doses of arsenic obtained from agricultural supplies. This poison weakened their victims, making them more susceptible to cold and disease-creating conditions that made their deaths appear natural. Once the families were weakened, the brothers would offer help, ultimately luring them to the warehouse for elimination. Another crucial testimony came from Henry Kellerman, Mary Kellerman's brother, who had worked briefly as a part-time employee for the Parker brothers during the winter of 1899. Henry had been hired to help with what he believed was legitimate estate clearing work, but was disturbed by what he witnessed. He described watching the brothers sort through personal items with cold efficiency, separating valuable objects from sentimental possessions. The brothers paid particular attention to family photographs and documents, which they would study before burning them in the furnace. Most disturbing was Henry's account of the brothers' casual discussions about their victims. They referred to them by property values, not names, and expressed satisfaction with how efficiently they had eliminated entire families without leaving evidence. Henry also provided details about the disposal methods. He had helped carry what he thought were bundles of contaminated clothing and bedding to the furnace, only to later realize they likely contained human remains. The brothers were meticulous about ensuring nothing identifiable survived the burning process, often grinding bone fragments and mixing them with ash before disposal. The full scope of the Parker brothers' crimes created a crisis of faith within the community of Hayes. Residents struggled to understand how such systematic evil had operated in their midst for years without detection. The revelation that the brothers had been killing families for 3 years before their 1899 spree raised painful questions about community responsibility and the warning signs that had been ignored. Church leaders organized special prayer services and community meetings to help residents process the trauma. Reverend William Hartwell, the Methodist minister, and Dr. Hartwell's brother, delivered sermons about the nature of evil and the importance of community vigilance. These sermons, preserved in the church archives, offer insight into how a religious community grappled with the existence of such systematic evil within their midst. The economic impact of the crimes continued to reverberate through the region. The brothers had illegally acquired vast amounts of property and possessions, creating a complex web of false ownership that took years to untangle. The community of Hayes was left to confront the devastating consequences of trusting two men who had exploited their faith and goodwill for years. The aftermath of the Parker brothers' crimes left deep scars on the community of Hayes and beyond. Many legitimate property owners were forced to engage in lengthy legal battles to reclaim their rightful possessions, and in some cases, properties were never successfully returned to their original owners. The case also had far-reaching implications for frontier communities across the American West, highlighting the vulnerability of isolated areas to systematic predators who exploited the trust and mutual dependence inherent in frontier life. In response, other communities began implementing new procedures for monitoring estate services and tracking population changes to prevent similar crimes in the future. State authorities introduced new protocols for investigating suspicious deaths and disappearances in rural areas. These protocols required multiple witnesses for death certifications, mandatory medical examinations of bodies, and detailed documentation of property transfers. The measures known as the Parker Protocols were adopted by several Western states and remained in use for decades. The Parker brothers' case also became a significant point of interest for the emerging field of criminal psychology. Dr. Hamilton Craig, an alienist studying criminal behavior at the University of Kansas, conducted extensive interviews with surviving witnesses and analyzed the brothers' writings and behavior. His findings, published in 1904, offered one of the first comprehensive psychological profiles of systematic murderers. Dr. Craig's analysis revealed that the Parker brothers displayed classic signs of what would later be termed psychopathic behavior. They exhibited a complete lack of empathy for their victims, viewing them as objects to be exploited rather than human beings with inherent value. Their ability to maintain facades of respectability while committing murder demonstrated sophisticated psychological manipulation. Additionally, the brothers showed remarkable adaptability in their criminal methods, constantly refining their techniques based on experience and changing circumstances. This adaptability, combined with their long-term planning abilities, indicated high intelligence and organizational skills that were ultimately channeled into criminal purposes. Most intriguingly, Dr. Craig's work suggested that the brothers had developed a shared delusion to justify their actions. They had convinced themselves they were performing a beneficial service by eliminating families who would otherwise suffer slow deaths from starvation and exposure. This psychological mechanism allowed them to commit mass murder while maintaining positive self-images. Over time, the brothers' writings revealed a gradual moral detachment from their crimes. Initially, their journal entries hinted at some awareness that their actions were wrong, but by the end, they demonstrated complete detachment from any moral consideration. Dr. Craig's findings contributed to the development of early criminal psychology theories and influenced law enforcement's approach to investigating systematic crimes. His work suggested that criminals like the Parker brothers could be identified through careful observation of their behavior patterns and psychological characteristics. The most shocking discovery related to the Parker brothers' crimes didn't surface until 1907, nearly 7 years after their execution. During the demolition of an old barn on the outskirts of Hayes, workers found a hidden chamber behind a false wall containing additional evidence of the brothers' activities. The chamber held hundreds of personal items that had belonged to the brothers' victims, including jewelry photographs, religious artifacts, and family documents. These items were organized meticulously, suggesting that the brothers had kept them as trophies or as a memorial to their crimes. Most disturbing were detailed maps and diagrams showing the locations of unmarked graves across the region. These documents revealed that the brothers had not always used their furnace to dispose of bodies. In some cases, they had buried victims in remote locations, marking the grave sites for future reference. The maps led investigators to 17 additional burial sites, containing the remains of 43 individuals. The discovery of these graves confirmed the true extent of the Parker brothers' crimes, expanding the number of their victims and sealing their place in history as one of the most horrifying criminal enterprises in American history. Forensic analysis of the remains uncovered that the Parker brothers had been killing families for at least 4 years before their capture, with an estimated total of over 400 victims. This staggering number makes their case one of the most extensive serial killing sprees in world history. The grave sites not only confirmed the extent of their crimes, but also provided disturbing evidence of the brothers' psychological deterioration over time. Earlier burials showed some attempt to treat the bodies with respect, but later graves revealed increasingly callous disposal methods. This change reflected the brothers' complete moral detachment from their actions. The Parker brothers' case had profound and lasting effects on American society, law enforcement, and criminal justice. The systematic nature of their crimes and the sophisticated methods they employed challenged existing assumptions about criminal behavior and community safety. It demonstrated that extreme evil could exist within seemingly normal communities, and that traditional social safeguards might not be enough to prevent such crimes. The legal proceedings following the brothers' execution established important precedents for handling cases involving systematic murder and property fraud. The complex web of false property transfers and forged documents necessitated new legal frameworks for restoring stolen property to rightful owners, influencing property law and estate procedures for decades. The case also had a significant impact on the development of law enforcement techniques. The investigation that exposed the brothers' crimes highlighted the importance of community cooperation in solving complex criminal cases. The success of the citizen investigators who initially suspected the brothers helped establish the principle that community members have both the right and responsibility to report suspicious activities to authorities. Dr. Craig's psychological analysis of the brothers contributed to the early development of criminal profiling techniques. His work provided a foundation for understanding how systematic murderers think and operate, influencing how law enforcement approach similar cases in the future. The Parker brothers case became a standard example in criminal psychology courses and police training programs. The community of Hayes was forever changed by the revelation of the brothers' crimes. The town's population had been devastated by the murders, and many survivors struggled with trauma and guilt for decades. The community developed new traditions and institutions designed to preserve the memory of the victims and prevent similar crimes from happening again. A memorial park was established on the site of the Parker brothers' warehouse, featuring monuments to the victims and educational displays about the importance of community vigilance. The park became a place of remembrance and reflection, helping the community process the trauma of the crimes and honor the memory of those who died. Despite extensive investigation, prosecution, and ongoing research, some aspects of the Parker brothers' case remain shrouded in mystery. The true number of victims may never be known, as the brothers' records were incomplete and much evidence was destroyed. Some estimates suggest that the number of victims could have been even higher than the confirmed 400, making their case possibly the most extensive serial killing spree in human history. The brothers' backgrounds and the origins of their criminal behavior remain partially unclear. Despite extensive investigation, authorities could never definitively determine whether they had committed similar crimes before arriving in Kansas, or if their activities were solely the result of the opportunities they found in frontier communities. Some evidence suggests they may have been involved in suspicious activities elsewhere, but no definitive connections were ever established. The psychological mechanisms that allowed the brothers to commit such systematic murder while maintaining facades of respectability continue to fascinate researchers. Their ability to live dual lives, appearing as helpful community members while secretly eliminating families, raises difficult questions about the nature of evil and the factors that can lead individuals to commit extraordinary crimes. The case also raises broader questions about the nature of community and the systems that bind societies together. The residents of Hayes had trusted the Parker brothers based on their reputation and apparent respectability, demonstrating how criminals can exploit social trust and community bonds to facilitate their crimes. The case of the Parker brothers serves as a stark reminder that vigilance and skepticism are essential even in the most close-knit communities. The winter of 1899 in Kansas was indeed the coldest on record. But the actions of the Parker brothers created a deeper, more pervasive cold. A cold that reached into the very soul of the community. It reminded everyone that evil can hide behind the most respectable facades. What the brothers burned in their furnace was more than just wood. It was human life dignity and the trust that binds communities together. However, the story of the Parker brothers is not ultimately about the triumph of evil, but about the power of community vigilance and individual courage. The investigation that led to their capture showed that ordinary citizens working together with determination and bravery can overcome even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises. Their case is a permanent reminder that freedom and safety require constant vigilance, and each member of a community has a responsibility to protect the vulnerable. The courage of Janet Thornfield, Dr. Hartwell, and the other investigators who exposed the brothers' crimes continues to inspire those facing difficult moral decisions in their own lives. More than a century after their execution, the case remains one of the most studied examples of systematic murder in criminal history. The lessons learned from their crimes still influence law enforcement, criminal psychology, and community safety practices today. Their story shows us that even in the darkest chapters of human history, truth and justice can ultimately prevail over the most calculated evil. But just when we thought we'd uncovered everything, the horror in Hayes deepens. If this story has sent chills down your spine, share it with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss tales like this. Together, let's continue uncovering the most terrifying and puzzling stories in the annals of American crime. This mystery serves as a reminder that evil can hide behind the most respectable facades, and that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or do you think there might be more victims whose stories will never be told? Leave your thoughts below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more stories like it, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. The truth is always more terrifying than fiction, and there are more stories waiting to be uncovered. See you in the next video. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.